Departure. The funeral began at the communal cemetery on the outskirts of the village. There were no gravestones, only round stones with names carved into them. The village chief was reciting the funeral rites. He spoke the name of a god I had never heard of, praying that their souls would find peace. There weren't enough hands to bury all the bodies at once, so this was to be the first of several services. Ainz watched from a distance, separate from the villagers. Among them were the sisters he had saved, Enri and Nimu Emmet. He'd heard their parents had been killed. He remembered the face of their father, who for some reason had worn a look of relief in his final moments. So it was that man. Beneath his robes, Ainz stroked a 30-centimeter-long wand. It was crafted from ivory, tipped with gold, and had runes carved into its grip, giving it a sacred air. The Wand of Resurrection. It was an item imbued with the magic of resurrection. Of course, this was not the only one Ainz possessed. He had enough of them to resurrect every single person who had died in this village, with plenty to spare. He'd been told that magic capable of reviving the dead did not exist in this world. If that were true, it meant that the potential for what could only be called a miracle existed in this very village. But as the prayers concluded and the funeral began to wind down, Ainz slowly returned the wand to his item box. He could bring them back, but he would not. It wasn't for any religious reason concerning the dead. It was simply because there was no benefit in it for him. A magic caster who brings death to those who draw near versus a magic caster who brings death but can also resurrect the dead. It wasn't hard to imagine which would be dragged into more trouble. Even if he made them swear to keep the resurrection a secret, the chances of that promise being kept were slim. The power to defy death itself, it was a power anyone would drool over. He might consider using it if circumstances changed, but for now, he still lacked too much information. In other words, he was abandoning lives he could save for his own sake. Beneath his mask, Ainz smiled a thin, cynical smile. In the distance, Enri and Nimu collapsed in tears. Committing the sight to memory, Ainz slowly started back on the path to the village, the Death Knight following behind him. The funeral had taken a fair amount of time, and by the time Ainz had finished learning about the surrounding area and some basic common knowledge, the sun was beginning to set. Well then, I shall be on my way. Lord Ainz, please visit the village again. Next time we will all welcome you properly. No, that won't be necessary. Chief, if you ever need anything, please feel free to come to me. I would be happy to help. Of course, I will have to charge a fee next time, he added with a smile. Understood, when that time comes. The smiling village chief and Ainz shook hands, gauntlet to palm. One could say they were now on friendly terms. Satisfied with this good feeling, Ainz began to walk away. As he stepped outside the chief's house, a single villager was standing there, her face filled with resolve. Beneath his mask, Ainz's eyes widened slightly. He hadn't expected her to come. It was Enri Emmet. Are you sure about this? Yes. Have you ridden a horse before? I have. 2 horses, taken from the knights, were tied up at the edge of the plaza. A set of full-plate armor was among the luggage packed onto one of them. But why are there so many experienced horse riders in this village? A long time ago, a man from this village went off to war. He returned with a handsome reward for his distinguished service, and among his prizes was a horse. He taught the children how to ride, which is why many of the young ones here know how. The village chief answered his question immediately. I see. Ainz now understood why she, out of all the people he could have chosen, was selected. It was a cruel assessment, but it likely meant she was the most expendable person in the village. The men would be needed to rebuild, whereas a young girl who had lost her parents was of a different value. Then, as promised, your payment is 200 gold coins. Ainz handed Enri the leather pouch of gold coins he had received from the chief. The bag, weighing 4 kilograms, was heavy in her hands. She took it with both hands, opened the mouth slightly to confirm its contents, and then passed the pouch to the village chief. "Please take care of this." "I will." Following the chief's solemn nod, Ainz spoke. "Rest assured, if you do not return, I promise to come and check on your sister's well-being about once a year. Village chief, that is acceptable, is it not?" "Yes, understood." 200 gold coins. In copper, that would be an astronomical sum of 40,000 coins, an amount far beyond a villager's comprehension. It was more than enough for 2 orphaned sisters to live on for a very long time. Even if the older sister were to die, it was more than sufficient to see the younger sister to adulthood. Of course, that didn't mean all their worries would disappear, but Ainz's words seemed to have eased her mind. Everyone could see the tension leave Henry's shoulders. Then, Ainz placed the parchment the chief had written for him into a scroll case and handed it to her. "I'm counting on you for this." "Yes, sir." Henry accepted the scroll case and tied it to her waist.
"Well then, I must. Thank you for everything, village chief." "No, the thanks are all ours, Lord Ainz. No one in this village will ever forget your kindness." The chief bowed deeply. Ainz raised a hand in response, and beside him, Henry hurriedly bowed her head as well. Ainz walked with Henry toward the horses. "And, well, you may not need these, but—" When they reached the horses, Ainz reached into his infinity haverset and took out 2 small horns, each small enough to be concealed in 2 hands. They were magic items he had prepared on his way back from the funeral. They looked like ordinary, unremarkable horns. The magic they contained was Summon Goblin Troop. He had simply attached the item data, which summoned 12 level 8 goblins, 2 level 10 goblin archers, 1 level 10 goblin mage, 1 level 10 goblin cleric, 2 level 10 goblin riders and wolves, and 1 level 12 goblin leader, to a store-bought horn. It was one of those unpopular items that summoned a large number of weak creatures, which would just get in the way at a hunting ground, earning you complaints from all sides. It was the kind of dangerous item that could get you labeled a grind spot griefer and put on blast on the forums. This is an item that temporarily summons monsters when you blow it. If you run into trouble, blow this horn and command the monsters that appear. If you complete your task without using it, you are welcome to keep it. "Thank you." Henry looked at the item over and over before carefully placing it in her knapsacks. Then she stared at Ainz as if looking at something strange. "Is something wrong?" You really are the one who saved us, right?" "What do you mean by that?" "Well, are you worried that I might be someone else wearing the same mask?" When he had manipulated the sisters' memories, he had made it so that he had appeared before them from the very beginning wearing his mask and gauntlets. He didn't recall altering any other memories, but... Ainz frowned, wondering if the spell had activated strangely or if he had made some sort of mistake. But her next words made him feel completely drained. "It's your way of speaking." It's basic to change your manner of speech depending on who you're talking to, or it should be. He spoke in the same gruff tone as he had back then, and Enwi's body flinched. "I'm so sorry." It's fine. I'm not angry." Ainz grabbed Henry as she started to bow and forced her head up. He could see several villagers looking their way after her loud voice. For Ainz, who just wanted to leave the village without any further incident, this was the last thing he needed. She must have been hurt when he forced her head up with his gauntleted hand. Henry was rubbing the spot where he had grabbed her. "I pray for your safe return." "Yes, sir." Her destination was a military camp said to be near an imperial fortress city. The village chief had told him that whenever the empire invaded, they always set up their camp in the same place. Ainz wondered if the empire was full of fools, but in any case, Henry's first task was to head there. Her purpose was to deliver the message that Ainz annihilated the knights who attacked the village. This was to advertise the existence of Ainz to the Empire. Letting some of the knights escape had been part of the same plan. He had judged that information about him would leak out sooner or later. If that was the case, he figured it was better to guide the narrative by releasing some information himself. It also included the cunning ploy of indebting some of the knights to him by saving their lives, though he didn't know which country they belonged to. He had come to this conclusion because he had determined that an information leak was inevitable. Acting without a complete grasp of information about the world was extremely dangerous. Therefore, the best course of action was to hide his presence and act in secret until he had gathered enough intel. But by saving this village, that was no longer an option. Even if he had annihilated all the knights, the nation they belonged to would surely investigate what had happened. Just as our world has developed scientific investigation, it was possible this world had developed magical investigation. Even if it hadn't, as long as there were surviving villagers, there was a high probability their investigation would eventually lead to Ainz. When that happened, how would that nation view him? To prevent information from leaking, he could have taken the villagers to the Great Tome of Nazarak. But from the perspective of the kingdom they belonged to, that could easily be construed as kidnapping. What if he framed it as a passing magic caster saving them? That would mean there was a wandering magic caster capable of easily killing knights. How would the various nations react to that? Either way, if an investigation was bound to reach him eventually, it seemed more convenient in the long run to act preemptively. Just like turning yourself in can lead to a lighter sentence.
Ainz was hoping, if possible, to align himself with one of the nations, the kingdom, the empire, or the theocracy. For example, if there were other players, information about them was bound to be circulating, but it would take a long time for Ainz to obtain that information on his own. Of course, he had considered sneaking into cities or using Demiurge's power to brainwash merchants, but the risks and effort involved were great. He might make enemies unnecessarily. From the sole standpoint of gathering information, joining a nation was a huge advantage. Furthermore, to protect the sovereignty of the Great Tomb of Nazarak, it was better to have the backing of some major power. Ainz did not underestimate the power of a nation. His lack of understanding of the upper limits of individual strength in this world only amplified this caution. There was no guarantee that someone with combat abilities surpassing his own didn't exist within one of these three nations. However, the fact that wars and conflicts continued meant that the powers on both sides were more or less balanced. Therefore, even if a level 10,000 being existed in one country, it was likely that a similar being existed in the opposing country as well. Becoming a member of a nation had its own set of potential disadvantages, but he had concluded that the advantages were greater. The question was what kind of position he would hold. He certainly had no desire to be a slave or an overworked employee at a toxic corporation. To that end, he would advertise his existence to the various powers. After considering their offers and the position he'd be given, he would side with the best one. This was the basic principle of changing jobs. It would have been faster for Ainz to go to the Empire's garrison himself. But he didn't know how the conversation would go, nor did he know the Empire's military strength. In that case, it was better to send someone who understood the risks and was prepared to die. That was Inri's role. In essence, he had bought Inri's life for 200 gold coins. "Lord Ainz, thank you so much for saving us." Inri bowed her head low. Ainz felt sick to his stomach, disgusted with himself for gambling with the life of a child, a girl really, all for his own self-preservation. He could probably escape with teleportation magic or use any number of other spells. He could even return to Nazarak and send out monsters. But he was sending this girl for the simple reasons that the enemy would let their guard down and that it would be easier to read their true intentions. Are you really okay with this? You might not come back alive if you go. You understand that, don't you? You could have chosen not to go. No one forced you. Why did you? Because without money, we can't survive. Ainz felt himself almost get swallowed by Inri's clear, translucent eyes as she stated this plainly. My parents are dead, and the village is in this state. I'm sure it would be a burden for them to look after us. So for us, for me, your offer was a godsend. You didn't have to take such a gamble. You might have been able to get by with what your parents left. Maybe, and maybe not. A third party might say, if you have so much money, why not just give her 200 gold coins? Ainz himself would have said the same thing if he were an outsider. But looking into this girl's eyes, no one could say such a thing. Ainz understood that he needed to fully grasp the value of the money he possessed. This wasn't a game. He couldn't think of it as game currency. He had to understand that people would risk their lives for even a fraction of what he held. He forced strength into his legs, which felt like they were about to buckle. Didn't I already understand that life was cheap? Ainz berated himself. What are you getting so shaken for? For a man who values himself above all else, this is the most benevolent path. What you are doing is right. His gaze shifted. In the shadow of a house next to the plaza stood her younger sister, Nemu. They must have already said their goodbyes, but she was still watching her older sister with lonely eyes. This could be their last farewell. He felt that desperation was woven into her gaze. Why wasn't she crying? Why wasn't she closer, cherishing their last moments? Why didn't she look at Ainz with hatred for sending her sister to her potential death? Ainz did not know. But, you should take this as well. He took a scroll from his infinity haversack. What is this? It's a scroll that allows teleportation to one's home base. If you were to use it, and if your home base is here, that would be fine, but it's uncertain how it will activate. It might not have any effect at all. But if you face a danger that even the horn cannot handle, open this scroll. Thank you. When your work is done, you should come straight to my home. I'll treat you to something delicious. Yes, sir. Is it all right if I bring my sister then? Of course. I'll be waiting. His friends would forgive him for this, he thought. The great tomb of Nazareth, a place where no outsider had ever been allowed to enter. As he watched her ride away on her horse, Ainz prayed that she would be the first. And, with equal intensity, how foolish I am, he thought to himself. Don't lose sight of what is truly important, he thought, fiercely, desperately. It was like a curse.